How's it going, everybody? So straight from the get-go, let's not sugarcoat this. These testing rounds this time are somewhat of a disaster, both how they were implemented as well as in terms of how they are received. Activity was down on day 2 already, and finding a Dominion game was pretty much impossible from then on out. Basically what I'm saying is that it seems like the community straight up rejected these changes straight from the get-go. But I do think there are some good concepts that definitely should eventually find their way to life, while others need to definitely be scrapped and should never see the light of day or even be talked about again. I will try and break these changes down and then give feedback in the context of what the blog post said. The premise of this TG seems to be that the devs want the defender in an outnumbered situation to be allowed to attack more without being overly punished for it. To be fair, these changes also left their mark in the 1v1 aspect, and I think in a mostly negative way. But yes, that is the context. How it was implemented doesn't necessarily reflect that, but considering that the exceptions to the rules that were listed in part in the blog post didn't make it in, we just have to make a couple of assumptions. I'll also show you a couple of exceptions to the rules at the end of the video, just so you can give feedback on those as well, as I think those weren't planned for or maybe even forgotten. But let's get to it. Let's break down the changes to Guardbreak vulnerability. First of all attack recoveries have become Guardbreak immune, with the exception of neutral startups. As many of you know, we have different types of recoveries: hit, block, superior block, whiff, and whatever else. All of these are now immune to Guardbreak. Let me give you a few examples. You whiff a finisher attack, your opponent tries to Guardbreak, and they will bounce off. I'll get into much greater detail in just a minute on when you bounce and when you can counter Guardbreak. Other example, you try to Guardbreak someone in the middle of a chain. You will now also bounce off. You try to Guardbreak a superior block recovery, such as a blocked light. This is no longer possible. Like I said, the blog post had listed a few exceptions, which are sadly not in this build. This ultimately means that we do not know all of them, and we have to assume which ones are supposed to be still guard breakable and which ones are not. In particular, charged bashes would become very one-dimensional if the GB punish went away, but we simply do not know at this point. So, what you might have noticed now is that during the recovery of moves, the guard break sometimes bounced off, and sometimes it resulted in a counter guard break. If you read the blog post, Ubisoft's statement is the following: when a hero regains the ability to block during a recovery, guard break attempts will land, but are techable. So this is what happens there. If you watch closely, you can see with both players trying to guard break. The first one bounces, and then you see my guard come up, which then lets the guard break land, but I can counter it. But okay, why is this important? Let's look at Revenge. Revenge guard breaks are still able to grab through this guard break immunity. All stages in which a guard break bounces can be grabbed with a Revenge guard break. The moment we enter the counter guard break phase, as previously explained, a Revenge guard break will also be techable. Let's leave it with Revenge though, otherwise this video would never end. So now we know what we have, let's talk about the good and the bad. Overall, this is a very blanket change that shifts the game more towards the bad and the good. But there is good in there. Let's look at some problematic moves and interactions in general. Aramusha would become near untouchable with these changes. You have zero options of punishing Ring the Bell, unless you have a side dodge bash. If you dodge it and attempt the guard break, that guard break will bounce, which will give me a light attack in return. If you dodge attack it, then I will simply blade blockade on the reaction and punish you for that. This is very similar to Lawbringer's chain shove on life at the moment. Then a more general concern. We do have bashes that allow you to chain into an attack. Why would I now need this? Guard breaks bounce anyways. There's zero reason for me to risk throwing out an attack and getting parried. This whole mind game is now gone from the game. These changes would remove a massive part of what made some characters. Players whine about hero identity to an annoying degree, to be honest, and while I mostly disagree with their assessment, this here would be one of those instances where it actually applies. I guess I really shouldn't say this when it comes to rather basic parts of a kit, and in particular something that we see on a multitude of heroes. But regardless, my point is that we cannot blanket change this without having tons of exceptions, which has the opposite effect of what standardization is supposed to do. You give up a tiny bit, but have something of greater value at the end, which this TG does not even come close to. So instead of having exceptions to the rule, let's just make a different rule. I am talking about whiffs. Blocks, hits, and so on can stay Guardbreak immune, but when a move whiffs, aka it misses the locked on target, then it should remain vulnerable to a Guardbreak. Within reason obviously, so please don't start the discussion of everything needing to be punishable with a Guardbreak. That's nonsense. Especially if it's on reaction. No. This will also stay in line with the initial goal of this testing round, to allow players to be more aggressive when outnumbered without being punished for every single button press. As long as you manage to hit somebody, you're safe. But the moment your attack misses, meaning you made a mistake, then your opponents can capitalize on that. This also retains the already established risk and reward numbers in 1v1 scenarios. Charged bashes remain the same, and a Musha will be able to be guard broken on a whiff during the bell. A whiffed kick on the Bushi can be guard broken unless she follows up with an attack. All these established interactions will remain in the game. What we've also seen in this testing round is the addition of a dodge attack on Highlander. I've made a separate video on it, so watch that if you need the details. But suffice it to say, this is not the final version of this attack. And no matter what anybody says, every hero will need something to be able to punish bashes. And Ubisoft's attempt to make dodge attacks that very option is a sound one. There's no real argument to be had here in my opinion. And the interaction between dodge attacks, guard breaks and recovery cancels, be it full blocks, dodge cancels, can still remain one. Requiring matchup knowledge to do well in a game, that's something good. It's not a negative thing. Learning a game should be a fun process. Learning how there are specific things you can do to beat a specific hero can be quite exciting. In this vein, Ubisoft slightly changed JJ's Shifu stance, allowing him to use it from hit stun to avoid chain bashes. There is a special interaction with buffered guards, which I will make a separate video about. So, instead of standardizing Jungjun's dodge attack as well, Ubisoft opted to go a different route and change Shifu's stance instead to fulfill this much needed role. The point I'm making here is that instead of the blanket change approach that they've chosen for the Guardbreak vulnerability, they chose a more nuanced one for the dodge attacks. Not to an annoying degree, where everything has to be fine-tuned on every single hero, but they took already existing tools and just slightly modified them, without losing any of the quote-unquote identity. I hate that I'm using this argument, but let's sum things up. This TG was an overall mess, and feedback will be predominantly negative. At least I assume so. But I think that parts of these changes would make the game better, yet it requires quite a bit of fine-tuning. The issues stated by the devs cannot be fixed with blanket changes like we've seen here. Since these came somewhat out of the blue, I am wondering whether Ubisoft has more in store and this is only their first step towards something else. Or I might be tripping and somebody just liked the idea of having no Guardbreak vulnerability whatsoever and thought a TG might be worth a shot. I do hope that this system will get a massive overhaul and the next time we get to test this, it'll be in an actual playable state where we can give proper feedback and many people get to test it. These types of testing rounds require double XP to get the masses to participate, because right now I can't even tell whether the player base thinks these changes are bad, they realize they're only implemented halfway, or they simply don't play because it's not double XP. Feel free to give your feedback as well, guys. I don't know whether Ubisoft will send out a survey since the TG is so scuffed, but if they do, please fill it out and send it back to them. You can also discuss it in my Discord. There is a separate channel for these changes and you'll find many knowledgeable people to bounce your ideas off. Having said all that, hope the video was helpful. Thanks for watching. Laters everybody.